September 7, 1940, in the heart of London's east, the sun is beginning to dip as the clock strikes 4 p.m. You are standing near the Royal Victoria Dock, and for the first time in nearly a year of war, the atmosphere feels genuinely heavy. Until now, the conflict has been something heard on the wireless or seen in the distance during the air battles over the Channel. But today, the hum in the air is different. It is not the light buzz of a few scouts, but a low, rhythmic thrum that vibrates in your very bones. Looking up, the sky is no longer blue. It is filled with a black swarm of over 300 German bombers, escorted by hundreds of fighters. This is the moment the world shifts. This is the start of Black Saturday, as the first sirens begin their rising and falling wail at 4:43 p.m. You realize your life is about to be measured in minutes and seconds. The air raid warden's whistle pierces the air, and suddenly, the funny war is over. You have to make a choice. Do you run for the brick communal shelter of your street, or do you dive into the Anderson shelter you buried in your back garden just last month? The ground begins to heave. The first sticks of bombs are hitting the docks, turning the Thames into a river of fire as warehouses filled with sugar, grain, and oil ignite. The smoke rises in a colossal pillar that can be seen from miles away, a dark omen of the months to come. By 8 p.m., the first wave is past, but there is no relief. As night falls, the German pilots use the massive fires of the docks as a beacon to guide a second, even larger wave of bombers. This is the transition to a new, war-torn reality. You are huddled in the dark, the smell of damp earth and cold concrete filling your nose. Above you, the sky screams. Every explosion sounds like the of the world, and every whistle of a falling bomb makes you hold your breath, wondering if this is the one with your name on it. You hear the frantic barking of dogs and the distant shouts of the auxiliary fire service, men and women who are fighting a losing battle against a literal sea of flames. In these early hours of the Blitz, the city's defenses are caught off guard. The anti-aircraft guns are sparse, and their rhythm is erratic. You listen to the thud of the guns and the terrifyingly smooth drone of the Heinkels and Dorniers overhead. There's a strange, horrific beauty to the scene if you dare to look out the searchlights dancing across the clouds, trying to snag a silver bird in their beams. But on the ground, it is pure chaos. Families are being separated, homes are being reduced to piles of splintered wood and dust, and the very fabric of London is being torn apart. People are flocking to the underground stations, defying government orders to stay out of the tubes, seeking the comfort of deep earth and the presence of others. By 3 a.m. the following morning, the all-clear finally sounds. You emerge from your shelter to find a world you no longer recognize. The air is thick with the acrid scent of cordite and the choking dust of pulverized brick. Ash falls like gray snow. Your neighbor's house is gone, replaced by a smoking crater and a jagged wall where a fireplace still hangs precariously. This is not a nightmare you can wake up from. This is your new Tuesday, your new Wednesday, your new every day. The transition from a city at peace to a city under siege has happened in less than 12 hours. This initial wave was meant to break the spirit of the British people, to force a surge through sheer terror and devastation. Yet, as the sun rose over the ruins of the East, something unexpected began to stir. Amidst the rubble, people began to boil kettles on makeshift fires. They checked on their neighbors, shared what little they had, and began the grim task of digging. The transition was complete. You were no longer just a civilian. You were a soldier on the home front, living in a landscape where the front line was your own front door. The fear was still there, but it was being replaced by a grim, quiet determination to simply exist out of spite against the bombers. The legacy of these first hours is not just one of destruction, but of an incredible, harrowing resilience. It reminds us that humanity possesses a startling ability to adapt to the unthinkable. When the sky falls, we do not simply vanish. We learn to live in the shadows of the ruins, finding a strange, defiant strength in the face of total uncertainty. The Blitz would continue for 57 consecutive nights, but it was here, in the smoke of September, that the enduring character of a nation was forged in fire. We look back at these events not just as a lesson in history, but as a testament to the fact that even when the world is burning, the human spirit refuses to be extinguished. It is a poignant reminder that while war can destroy our cities, it can never truly conquer the collective will to survive and rebuild. October 1st, 1940, in the heart of London, the sun dipped below the horizon, and a city of 8 million people vanished into an abyss of total, unyielding darkness. This was the blackout, a state-mandated invisibility designed to blind the Luftwaffe, but it fundamentally altered the very fabric of human existence. From 6 p.m. until dawn, the metropolis became a labyrinth of shadows, where even the glow of a cigarette could be detected from 30,000 feet. Thick, heavy curtains of black wool or cardboard were pinned over every window. Streetlights were extinguished, and the headlights of cars were reduced to tiny, horizontal slits that cast a meager, ghost-like glow on the pavement. Walking home from work became a treacherous odyssey. People stumbled into sandbags, walked into lampposts, or tripped over the curbs of streets they had known since childhood. In those first months, more civilians were killed in road accidents under the cover of darkness than by German bombs. Yet this enforced gloom created a strange, shared intimacy. You navigated by sound, by the rhythm of footsteps, and by the low, muffled voices of neighbors passing by in the murk. It was a sensory deprivation that sharpened every other instinct and forced a city of strangers to listen to the breathing of the world around them. While the nights were defined by darkness, the days were defined by the slow, grinding reality of scarcity. By the autumn of 1940, the lavish displays of the British grocery store were a fading memory. The Battle of the Atlantic was strangling the supply lines that fed the island, and the government responded with the most egalitarian system of consumption ever devised, the ration book. Every man, woman, and child was issued a small booklet of coupons that dictated exactly how much meat, butter, sugar, and tea they could consume. At 8 a.m., long before the shops even opened, queues began to snake around street corners. Standing in line became a national pastime, a test of patience where housewives spent hours in the rain just to secure a single egg or a few ounces of bacon. The Ministry of Food, led by Lord Woolton, became the architect of the British kitchen. They urged citizens to dig for victory in their backyards, turning pristine flower beds into potato patches. They introduced the world to the Woolton pie, a humble concoction of carrots, parsnips, and turnips that tried its best to satisfy an appetite that craved roast beef, but had to settle for a hearty root vegetable substitute. It was not just food that required a calculated approach to survival. Clothes, soap, and fuel were all strictly monitored and distributed. To survive the Blitz, you had to learn the art of the substitute. Acorn coffee, mock bananas made from boiled parsnips in essence, and reconstituted eggs became the staples of a wartime diet. People shared tips on how to make a single piece of coal last through a freezing night, or how to turn an old overcoat into a child's winter jacket. The motto, "Make, Do, and Am," was not just a government slogan, it was a psychological survival strategy. There was a peculiar dignity in these hardships. The wealthy and the poor alike stood in the same lines, holding the same buff-colored books, facing the same hunger. This leveling of the social classes was one of the most unexpected consequences of the war. It forged a collective identity that transcended the old barriers of status, creating a community bound by the shared struggle of simply getting through the week. However, we must not romanticize it as a period of pure, joyful unity. The strain was immense. The constant checking of blackout curtains for any sliver of light, the fear of the blackout warden knocking on your door with a sharp reprimand, and the gnawing hunger of a diet low in protein took a toll on the nerves. By 10:15 p.m., the sound of the sirens often interrupted the meager meal you had spent all day preparing. You had to abandon your cold tea and head for the shelter, clutching your ration book as your most prized possession, because without it you simply did not eat. It was a life lived in fragments, punctuated by the roar of engines and the silent, hungry wait for morning. As we look back on these mechanics of daily survival, we see more than just a list of regulations and restrictions. We see the blueprint of a society that refused to break under the pressure of total war. The legacy of the Blitz is found in the quiet persistence of the ordinary citizen who found light in the darkness and abundance in the midst of famine. It reminds us that survival is not always found in the grand gestures of heroism on the battlefield, but in the small daily triumphs of the human spirit. It is the story of how a nation learned that while they could be starved of bread and hidden from the light, they could never be robbed of their dignity. The resilience forged in the queues and the shadows remains a testament to the fact that when the world is stripped down to its barest essentials, the strength of the collective will is the only thing that truly matters. Even in the deepest dark, the light of human resolve continues to shine. September 7, 1940, over the industrial docks of East London, the sky transforms into a bruised canvas of smoke and fire. As the first wave of over 300 German bombers retreats, leaving the horizon glowing with a hellish light, you are faced with a choice that will define your survival for the next 8 months. The sirens began their mournful rising and falling wail at 4:48 p.m. But for many, the true terror doesn't begin until the sun dips below the horizon. As night falls, the Luftwaffe returns, and you must decide where to place your life. To your left is the narrow garden path leading to your private Anderson shelter, a corrugated steel sarcophagus buried in the cold earth. To your right is the local underground station, a descent into a subterranean world where thousands of heartbeats thrum in the darkness. The Anderson shelter was the government's answer to the working-class family's need for protection. It is a humble structure, 6 feet long and barely 6.5 feet high, made of 14 curved sheets of galvanized steel bolted together and sunk 3 feet into the ground. By 8 p.m., as the first distant thuds of high explosives begin to rattle your windows, you find yourself crouching inside its damp, metallic belly. The smell is the first thing that hits you. It is the scent of wet clay, rusting iron, and the pervasive chill of a British autumn. You have tried to make it a home, laying down wooden slats to keep your feet out of the 6 inches of muddy water that inevitably collects at the bottom. You have brought a paraffin lamp and a few wool blankets, but as the anti-aircraft guns at the nearby park begin their rhythmic barking, the thin steel walls feel agonizingly fragile. You are isolated here. There is privacy, yes, but every whistle of a falling bomb feels like it is aimed directly at your spine. You sit in the dark, clutching a thermos of tea, wondering if the house standing just 30 feet away will still be there when the sun rises. However, if the crushing isolation of the garden shelter is too much to bear, you join the thousands of Londoners who have defied government orders to seek sanctuary in the depths of the earth. By 7:30 p.m., the queues at the entrance of the tube stations stretch around the block. Initially, the authorities forbade the use of the underground as a shelter, fearing it would impede troop movements and foster a bunker mentality. But the people of London decided otherwise. They bought penny tickets and simply refused to leave the platforms. Now, as you descend the escalators, the temperature rises. The air becomes thick and heavy, a humid mixture of ozone, unwashed bodies, and the faint, metallic tang of the rails. Life on the platform of a station like Elephant and Castle or Holborn is a surreal exercise in communal living. By 9:15 p.m., every square inch of concrete is occupied. You find a spot on the floor, your back against a colorful advertisement for Bovril or Piers soap. There is no privacy here. You are surrounded by the snoring of elderly men, the soft whimpering of children, and the low, constant murmur of card games and gossip. Yet, there is a profound sense of security in the sheer mass of earth above your head. 70 feet of London clay separates you from the carnage on the streets. When a heavy bomb strikes the surface, you don't hear the explosion so much as feel it, a dull, thumping vibration that makes the dust dance in the dim light of the emergency bulbs. The choice between the Anderson and the tube is a choice between 2 different kinds of courage. In the garden, you face the night with your family, relying on the resilience of steel and the luck of the draw. In the depths, you soar your individuality to become part of a subterranean civilization. You witnessed the birth of the shelter committees and the arrival of the refreshment specials, trains that pull into the stations at 11 p.m. to distribute tea and buns to the huddled masses. You see the resilience of the human spirit in the way a neighbor shares a crust of bread or leads a chorus of a popular song to drown out the sounds of the world being torn apart above. As the clock strikes 3 a.m., the city above is a landscape of shattered glass and burning timber. Whether you are shivering in a hole in your backyard or breathing the stale air of the Northern Line, you are part of a secret history written in the shadows. This descent into the depths was not merely a tactical retreat. It was a psychological migration. The people of the Blitz learned that safety is not just a matter of physical barriers, but of the strength found in one's proximity to others. The legacy of these shelters is etched into the very identity of the modern city. It is found in the enduring myth of the Blitz spirit, a communal resilience born in the damp earth and the crowded tunnels. These structures reminded a generation that when the sky falls, the only thing more solid than the ground beneath your feet is the person standing next to you. The Anderson shelters have long since been dug up and melted down, and the tube platforms have returned to their transit duties, but the memory of those nights remains. It serves as a poignant reminder that in the face of absolute destruction, humanity's first instinct is not just to survive, but to seek out the light of shared company in the deepest dark. December 29, 1940, London. The air raid sirens began their low, mournful wail just as the sun dipped below the horizon, signaling a night that would forever be etched into the city's soul as the Second Great Fire of London. While the shelters below ground were filled with the sound of hushed prayers and nervous chatter, above the surface, the city was about to become an inferno. The Luftwaffe had changed its tactics. Instead of high explosives designed to shatter stone, they dropped over 100,000 incendiary bombs. These magnesium canisters didn't just explode, they burned with a white-hot intensity that could eat through a roof in seconds. By 6 p.m., the city of London was a grid of orange flickers that quickly merged into a singular, roaring wall of heat. If you were a member of the auxiliary fire service that night, you weren't a professional soldier. You were likely a clerk, a teacher, or a dock worker who had volunteered for a few shillings a week. Your uniform was often a heavy, scratchy tunic that did little to stop the searing heat of a firestorm. By 7 p.m., the situation had turned critical. The water mains, those vital arteries of the city's defense, had been shattered by the few high explosives that accompanied the firebombs. As the pressure dropped, the hoses of the firefighters went limp in their hands. They were standing in the middle of a furnace with nothing but buckets of sand and hand-operated stirrup pumps to fight back a tide of liquid fire. The most iconic image of this night remains the dome of St. Remains, Paul's Cathedral, rising above the smoke like a defiant ghost. At 8 p.m., the cathedral was hit by nearly 30 incendiaries. One of them lodged itself in the very lead of the dome. If it had burned through, the masterpiece of Christopher Wren would have been lost forever. Fire watchers on the roof, equipped with nothing but iron shovels and sheer desperation, kicked the canisters off the stone edges or smothered them with sandbags while the sky turned a bruised purple above them. Down at the river's edge, the crisis took a different shape. The tide was out, and the Thames, usually a reliable source for emergency water, was nothing more than a vast expanse of thick, black mud. Fireboats sat uselessly in the silt. By 10 p.m., the wind had picked up, but it wasn't a natural breeze. The fire was so vast it was creating its own weather system, sucking cold air in from the surrounding streets to feed the flames, creating a draft so powerful it could knock a grown man off his feet. This was the firestorm phenomenon, where the air itself seems to be screaming. The response was a chaotic symphony of human grit. Telephone lines were severed early in the evening, leaving the fire stations blind. This fell to the messengers, often boys as young as 14 or 15, who rode bicycles through the falling debris and whistling shrapnel to deliver handwritten notes. At 11:15 p.m., one such messenger arrived at a regional control center, his clothes singed and his face blackened by soot, just to report that a single block in the east was entirely engulfed. The women in the control rooms worked through the night, plotting the spread of the fires on maps while the heat grew so intense that the wax on their pencils began to melt. By 2 a.m., the city was a silhouette of jagged ruins against a backdrop of gold. The heat was melting the asphalt of the roads, making every step a struggle for the men hauling heavy brass nozzles. They worked in shifts of absolute exhaustion, faces scorched, eyes red and weeping from the acrid smoke. When a hose finally found a trickle of water, the steam produced would blister any exposed skin instantly. Yet they did not retreat. They stood their ground in the middle of the street, knowing that if they gave up a single house, the entire neighborhood would follow. As the first gray light of dawn broke at 7 a.m., on December 30th, the true scale of the devastation was revealed. Over 1,500 people had lost their lives in a single night. Entire blocks of historic London were nothing but hollowed-out shells, their interiors still glowing like the embers of a dying campfire. But as the smoke cleared, the dome of St. Paul's remained. It was a miracle of engineering and a testament to the people who refused to let it fall. The legacy of that night is not found in the ruins, but in the evolution of how we protect one another. The emergency response efforts of 1940 laid the groundwork for modern civil defense, proving that a centralized, coordinated effort is the only way to combat a catastrophe of that magnitude. It taught the world that the fire of human resolve is often hotter than the flames of war. Looking back at the blackened skyline of that December morning, we see a turning point in history. It was the night London proved it could not be burned out of existence. The scorched stone of the city today serves as a silent witness to a generation that stood in the mouth of hell and refused to blink. It reminds us that even when the sky burns and the water runs dry, the spirit of service is a flame that no amount of shadow can ever truly extinguish. January 1941, the bruised streets of East London. The initial shock of the aerial campaign is past, and in its place, a heavy, suffocating normalcy has taken root. You wake up in the freezing darkness of a communal shelter at 5 a.m., your lungs heavy with the scent of damp wool and recycled air. Above ground, the world is a jigsaw puzzle of shattered glass and craters, yet the milkman still makes his rounds through the rubble. This is the stage of the war, where the spirit is no longer tested by sudden terror, but by the slow, grinding erosion of the soul. The government had predicted that sustained bombing would lead to mass hysteria and a total collapse of the civilian mind. They expected thousands of psychiatric casualties, believing that the average citizen would break under the weight of the Luftwaffe payloads. But by early 1941, the reality on the ground is far more complex. The psychological toll isn't a sudden snap, but a quiet, creeping exhaustion. It shows in the way a housewife's hand trembles as she measures out a meager tea ration at 8 a.m., or the way a father stares blankly at the hole where his neighbor's kitchen used to be. The toll is measured in the minutes of sleep lost and the constant vibrating tension in the shoulders. Living through the Blitz is an exercise in the management of fear. There is a strange phenomenon occurring in the shelters, a division between the remote survivors and the vivid survivors. If you are a remote survivor, the bombs fall blocks away. You feel the shudder, you hear the roar, but your world remains intact. You feel a surge of relief, a sense of invincibility that borders on euphoria because you escaped once more. But for the vivid survivors, those who have been dug out of the debris or who have seen their street vanished by a parachute mine at 11:30 p.m., the trauma is a silent, oppressive shadow. They do not scream. They simply go quiet, their minds retreating into a space where the sirens can no longer reach them. Night after night, the routine remains the same. As dusk falls around 5 p.m., the exodus begins. Thousands of Londoners dissect into the bowels of the earth, taking up residence on the platforms of the underground. Here, class distinctions dissolve in the face of a common enemy. You might find a bank clerk sharing a thermos with a dock worker while the trains continue to rattle past just inches from their makeshift beds. The smell is unforgettable. A mixture of disinfectant, sweat, and the faint metallic tang of the tracks. It is loud, it is cramped, and it is the only place where the whistle of a falling bomb feels distant enough to allow for sleep. Yet, communal resilience is not just about hiding. It is about the defiance of the ordinary. It is found in the women's voluntary service vans that appear at 3 a.m. in the middle of a raid, serving hot cocoa to firemen who are too tired to stand. It is found in the humor that becomes a shield. When a shop window is blown out, a sign appears the next morning reading, "More open than usual." This isn't just British stoicism. It is a vital psychological defense mechanism. By laughing at the destruction, you strip the enemy of his power to intimidate you. It is a way of saying that while you may take our roofs, you cannot take our dignity. But we must not ignore the cost of this durance. The Blitz spirit was often a mask worn to hide a profound sense of loss and a deep, aching fatigue. People are living in a state of hypervigilance, their ears tuned to the specific drone of a Heinkel engine versus the reassuring hum of a Spitfire. Every heavy door slam or backfiring truck triggers a momentary freezing of the heart. The resilience seen on the surface hides a generation that will carry the weight of these nights for the rest of their lives. They are learning to live with the impossible, to find a way to make a home in a wasteland of brick and mortar. As we look back at these months of fire and shadow, we realize that the true victory of the Blitz was not won in the dogfights over the Channel, but in the quiet corners of the shelters and the shattered kitchens of the working class. The legacy of this period is not merely one of survival, but of a profound social shift that changed the way neighbors looked at one another. It proved that the common individual possesses a reservoir of strength that no amount of high explosives can deplete. It reminds us that communal bonds are the ultimate armor against despair. Even when the world is falling apart at 2 a.m., there is a light that remains. Not the light of a burning city, but the steady, flickering flame of human connection that refuses to go out, proving that while a building can be leveled in a second, the shared resolve of a people can endure through the longest night of history. This endurance is the quietest form of courage, a legacy that still echoes in the silence of the city today. May 11th, 1941, London. The sun climbed into a sky thick with the soot of 1,000 fires, illuminating a city that had just endured its longest and most violent night. The raid that had begun the previous evening had lasted until nearly 6 a.m., leaving behind a landscape so unrecognizable that even lifelong residents found themselves lost on their own streets. This was the final, brutal crescendo of the Blitz, a night when the House of Commons was gutted by fire and the very heart of the British capital seemed to be hemorrhaging. Yet, as the smoke drifted toward the Thames, a strange and powerful phenomenon began to take hold. It was not the sound of mourning that filled the air, but the clatter of shovels and the persistent, rhythmic sound of people going back to work. To understand the legacy of the Blitz, one must look past the propaganda and the polished speeches of the era. Behind the famous posters and the stirring radio broadcasts were ordinary people who had been pushed to the absolute edge of human endurance. They were mothers who spent every night in damp, overcrowded shelters, checking their children's breathing by the dim light of a torch. The Rurgeries retrolled the streets at 11 p.m. as the first whistles of Desing bombs signaled another night of terror. They were the shopkeepers who, upon finding their storefronts reduced to a heap of glass and brick, simply propped up a chalkboard that read, "More open than usual." This resilience was not born of an absence of fear, but of a collective decision to carry on despite it. The psychological weight of the Blitz was immense. By the time the sun rose at 7 a.m., on any given morning during that terrible winter, thousands of Londoners had lost their homes, their possessions, and their neighbors. Yet, the social fabric did not unravel. Instead, it tightened. The shared experience of the shelters created a temporary, classless society, where the dock worker and the clerk shared the same tea and the same anxieties. This communal bond became the ultimate armor against the Luftwaffe's attempt to break the national will. As we look back from the safety of the 21st century, we often view these events through a romanticized lens, but the true legacy for posterity is much more grounded and profound. The Blitz taught us that the strength of a nation is not measured by the height of its monuments or the size of its treasury, but by the quiet resolve of its people when the lights go out. It proved that humanity possesses a staggering capacity to adapt to the unthinkable. When the routine of life is shattered at 2 p.m. by an air raid siren, the human spirit finds a way to make the extraordinary feel ordinary, turning survival into a daily craft. Today, the physical scars of the Blitz are fading. Many of the empty spaces in London's neighborhoods have been filled with glass towers and modern apartments. Yet if you look closely at the brickwork of old buildings, you can still see the pockmarks left by shrapnel. These are the signatures of history, reminders that the peace we enjoy was forged in a furnace of fire and iron. The legacy of the home front is a testament to the fact that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary courage. It reminds us that even when the sky falls, the foundations of human decency and neighborly support can remain unshaken. If there is a lesson for us today, it is that we are never as helpless as we feel in the face of a crisis. The people of the Blitz did not know when the war would, or if they would survive to see the next sunset. They lived in a state of permanent uncertainty, yet they continued to plant gardens, to write letters, and to plan for a future they could not yet see. They showed us that hope is not a passive emotion, but a disciplined practice of moving forward, one step at a time, through the ruins. The story of the home front is a story of a light that refuses to go out. It is the steady, flickering flame of human connection that persists even when the world feels like it is in at 3 a.m. in a cold basement. This assurance is the quietest form of courage, a legacy that still echoes in the silence of our cities today. It is a reminder that while a building can be leveled in a second, the shared resolve of a people can endure through the longest night of history. As we move forward into our own uncertain futures, we carry their fire with us, knowing that we too possess that same reservoir of strength, waiting to be tapped when the shadows grow long. The sirens have long been silent, but the spirit they failed to break remains our most enduring inheritance.